Hi, my name is Emily, and I guess I'm the woman whose husband locked her in a basement, 8 months pregnant, as our house burned above me. He told everyone it was an accident. But do you know what he did next? He flew to Paris with her, the woman who helped him heal, the woman who slept in my bed, while I still couldn't walk without shaking. But here's what they didn't expect. I lived, and I remember everything. Before we dive in, tell me, what time is it where you are right now? And who's the last person you truly trusted? Because by the end of this story, you might just question that too. He left the papers on the counter again. I was standing at the sink, rinsing off a bowl from dinner, when I saw the envelope. Cream-colored, unsealed, the kind you don't think twice about. It was sitting next to the pen, the good pen, the one that only came out when something needed my signature. I didn't open it right away. I dried my hands, wiped down the counter like I always do. Then I picked it up and walked it to the kitchen table. Sat down, opened it, skimmed. Nothing jumped out. Something about a beneficiary update. Some language about coverage, premiums, all the words I'd seen 100 times before. I signed the bottom without thinking twice. I always do. In our house, things flow toward me when they need to get done. He sets them down, I sign them. Tax forms, mortgage adjustments, health insurance stuff, even the cable bill when we changed providers last year. I'm the one who files it all, who keeps things moving. He says I'm just better at that kind of thing. You're more organized, he tells me every time. Sometimes I wonder if that's true, or just something he says because he knows I won't argue. It was a Thursday night, late October. I remember because it was already getting dark by 6:30, and I had the little ceramic pumpkin candle burning on the counter. I was 8 months pregnant, tired all the time, swollen in every direction. Still, I'd made dinner, chicken and rice, something mild, and we'd eaten together in front of the TV, barely speaking. He had scrolled his phone most of the time. I didn't ask questions. That night, after signing the paperwork, I put it in the file folder labeled House Insurance and slid it into the cabinet drawer, right where it always goes. I sat back down on the couch. My back ached, and the baby had been moving more than usual that day, little flutters, then harder kicks, like he was stretching, or maybe restless, like me. My husband looked up briefly from his phone and smiled. "Tired?" he asked. I nodded. He didn't say anything else, neither did I. It's strange how quiet our house had become, not in a cold way, just settled. Like everything had already been decided. That's how I was raised, honestly. I'm the youngest of 3 girls. I grew up in a house where staying quiet meant keeping the peace, where crying wasn't useful and questions made things worse. My mother didn't have time for drama, and my father didn't tolerate noise. So I learned to nod, to smile, to say okay and mean it, even when I didn't. Being the youngest teaches you how to read the room, how to shrink yourself just enough so no one notices when you're hurting. I brought those habits into my marriage without even realizing it. In the early years, I told myself it was maturity, being the reasonable one, the calm one. I wasn't impulsive like some women. I didn't nag or demand or sulk. I was the good kind of wife, the kind men tell their mothers about. I signed the lease when we moved in. I signed the car loan. I signed the joint checking account, the will, the pre-approval for the home equity line. He never pressured me, not directly. He just left things in front of me and said, "It's ready when you are." So I signed. That night, sitting on the couch, I caught a glimpse of his laptop open across the room. Some kind of travel site was on the screen, but I couldn't make out the details. I leaned forward slightly. He noticed and closed it. "Just browsing," he said casually. "Looking at places for a baby moon, maybe?" "We talked about not flying this late," I reminded him gently. He waved a hand. Just killing time. Nothing serious. I didn't say anything, just leaned back into the cushions. But something in my stomach twisted, not the baby, something else, a tightness I couldn't name. Was that what the papers were about? I asked quietly. The ones on the counter? Yeah, he replied, not looking up. Just some updates from the insurance, routine stuff. Should I have read them more closely? He smiled, soft, tired. Honey, you're overthinking again. You're exhausted. Everything's fine. Pregnancy brain. That's what he called it when I couldn't remember where I put my keys, or when I asked a question twice. I wanted to believe him. God, I did. I told myself I was just tired, that maybe I was looking for something that wasn't there. That's what he said the last time, too. When I mentioned he seemed distant. You're just stressed. Let's not turn this into a thing. So I let it go, because it was easier than pushing, because I didn't want to be that woman, the one who pokes at something until it explodes. And maybe part of me was still clinging to the version of him from the beginning, the man who brought me soup when I had the flu, who held my hand during the first ultrasound and cried when he heard the heartbeat. Maybe I was holding on to the comfort of routine, of papers signed and filed, dinners eaten quietly, a life that from the outside looked solid and stable. That night, I poured myself a glass of water, turned off the pumpkin candle, and climbed into bed without brushing my teeth. He joined me 20 minutes later, his phone screen lighting up the room before he set it. Down. He kissed my forehead. You're amazing, you know that? He whispered. I nodded, eyes closed, let the words land without letting them in. The next morning, I couldn't even remember what the papers said. Just that I signed them. Like always, I told myself it was nothing. I told myself I was safe. And then I made oatmeal the next morning, poured his coffee, kissed his cheek like always. It was just another quiet day in a house that ran on silence and routine. After he left for work, I sat at the kitchen table with a notepad and tried to make a list of what we still needed before the baby came. Diapers, another crib sheet, freezer meals. I scribbled down tasks, then circled insurance update from earlier in the week. I had signed the form, yes, but something about it was still nagging at me. Not in a loud way, just lingering. It was later that afternoon, when I was digging through our file drawer to double-check the pediatrician forms, that I saw the policy again. It was clipped neatly in the folder, labeled in his handwriting. Life, primary. I opened it, flipping through, not really looking for anything in particular. My eyes caught on a figure printed in bold. $9 million. I paused, blinking at it like I hadn't seen it right the first time. 9 million. I sat back for a moment and let that number settle. Not 500,000, not even 1 million, which was already more than enough for most families I knew. 9 million felt big, bigger than anything we'd ever talked about, certainly more than we'd ever need. Still, I told myself it made sense. College tuition was outrageous now. The mortgage wasn't small. Maybe he was just thinking ahead. He'd always been the kind of man who planned things in big strokes. When he came home that evening, I asked about it lightly while we stood in the kitchen, the fridge open between us. Hey, I said, I saw the new policy when I was sorting through the folders. 9 million, that's a lot. He didn't miss a beat. It's for you and the baby, he said, taking out a carton of eggs. If something ever happened to me, I'd want you two to be set for life. No stress. I nodded slowly. It just caught me off guard, that's all. He closed the fridge door and looked at me, soft smile on his face. That's what responsible men do, right? Plan for the worst, hope for the best. Right, I said, almost to myself. It's a good thing. He reached out, touched my arm gently. We've got a future, Sarah. Might as well make sure it's secure. And with that, he turned away, headed down the hall to the laundry room. I stood there for a moment longer, the fridge humming behind me, trying to match his tone. Optimism, not fear, not escape, just planning. That night, while folding towels, he mentioned the basement again. Said it might be smart to start spending more time down there since I'd been getting overheated in the afternoons. "It's cooler," he pointed out, "and quieter. You'll be more comfortable, especially now that you're in the home stretch." He wasn't wrong. The fall days had still been unseasonably warm, and sometimes I did feel lightheaded, moving around upstairs. So the next day, I brought down a small basket of laundry and folded it in the basement instead of the living room. It did feel better, cooler air, softer lighting, peaceful in a way. The following day, I set up a chair and an old floor lamp by the shelves, put on some soft music, brought a glass of water. I told myself I'd stay down there for an hour, maybe 2, and rest while sorting the baby clothes. By the end of the week, I was spending half the day in that basement. He even moved my laptop and a few books down for me. "It just makes sense," he'd said. "No stairs, no noise, and everything you need right here." It became routine, without any decision really being made. I started keeping snacks down there, my prenatal vitamins, even a blanket for naps. At some point, it stopped feeling like a temporary setup and more like my own little corner of the house. I didn't think much of it at the time. It felt practical, efficient, safe even. The policy paperwork was updated again a few days later. A new envelope appeared on the table, this one with just 1 page inside. A signature line already highlighted. He handed it to me casually. "Just a quick revision the agent needed. Small details, nothing new." I held the paper in my hands for a second longer than usual. My eyes scanned the fine print, but the words swam together. Legal language, numbers, clauses. I wasn't sure what I was looking for. "Why does it need to be updated again?" I asked, keeping my voice light, almost playful. He gave a small chuckle. "Bureaucracy. They update the forms every time there's a change in contact info or something minor. You know how these companies are." I waited for more, but he just smiled at me like he always did when he wanted me to stop worrying. "It's the same policy," he added. "Just cleaner formatting. Nothing's changed." I nodded. "Okay," I said, and I signed it. Then I tucked it away in the file drawer, same as always. I wanted to believe everything was normal. I needed to. Maybe because by then, the pattern felt too far along to interrupt. Like we were both actors in a scene that had already been rehearsed too many times to change now. I didn't know then that routines can be rehearsals. But when I opened my eyes in that hospital room, something inside me knew we were already on a script I hadn't written. Everything was soft, the kind of quiet that hums beneath fluorescent lights and monitors. The air smelled like bleach and warmed plastic. I couldn't remember falling asleep. I couldn't remember waking up. All I knew was the white blanket over my belly, the nurse's low voice saying, "You're lucky, the baby's okay, you're both okay." I nodded, but I didn't say much. Not because I was too shocked to speak, but because I felt oddly outside of myself, like I was borrowing this body, this moment. Later, I heard my husband talking with the doctor outside the curtain. Their voices didn't reach me in full, just fragments. Smoke inhalation, stable, mild dehydration. Then the curtain pulled back, and there he was. Face soft, eyes watery, like the world had almost ended, and he was still catching his breath. "Thank God," he said, stepping close to take my hand. "When I saw them pulling you out, His voice cracked. "It's a miracle you made it." I wanted to believe him. I tried to feel what he seemed to feel, but all I felt was tired. He sat beside me for a long time that morning. He stroked my hair and kept repeating that same word everyone else had used. Accident. They think it was electrical, he told me. You know how old houses are. I nodded again. I didn't trust my thoughts yet. They were scattered, foggy. So I just listened. Nurses came and went. One of them offered to clean soot from under my nails, but I told her no. I don't know why. Maybe I wanted to keep a piece of it. Proof I hadn't dreamed the fire. That it had really happened. By the afternoon, people started talking logistics. My husband spoke quietly into his phone in the hallway, pacing near the vending machines. Words like claim, adjuster, documents floated toward me when the door opened. I didn't ask questions, not because I was afraid, because I still didn't know what I didn't know. The second evening, a social worker came to speak with me. Routine, she said, just checking in. She asked if I remembered what happened. I was in the basement, I said. I smelled something, but by then I couldn't really move. You're very lucky, she said. The firefighters were quick. That word again. Lucky. I nodded, and she made a few notes on her clipboard. That night, as I lay in the quiet room, the baby stirred. A small kick against my ribs. It should have brought comfort. It did in some ways, but it also made me feel like I had to hold everything inside, just for a little while longer. No breakdowns, not yet. The morning of the second day, he came in with a folder, sat beside me, calm as ever. Good news, he said. The insurance company's already moving on the paperwork. They said everything looks clean. You won't have to deal with anything. I'm handling it? I frowned slightly. Already? They move fast when it's clear cut. The fire marshal's report helped. They said it could be wrapped up in 48 hours. 48? I repeated. Yeah, he said. They've already got our policy, and since you signed the update last week, everything's aligned. Aligned. That word sat in my chest like a stone. Not heavy enough to stop me from breathing, but just enough to make every breath feel like work. You should rest, he added, brushing hair off my forehead. Don't worry about a thing. It's all being taken care of. I tried to believe him. I wanted to. But a quiet pulse of unease had started in the back of my head, and no matter how many times I blinked, it didn't go away. Throughout the rest of the day, nurses continued their rounds. The doctor came in to check vitals. No one asked me what I remembered beyond that one social worker. No one questioned why I had been in the basement in the first place. No one wondered why the fire seemed to have started in the kitchen, but I had been left locked below. And God help me, I didn't offer anything either. I told myself I was confused. That maybe the door hadn't been locked. That maybe it wasn't intentional. That maybe trauma makes you misremember things. That maybe. That night, as the hallway lights dimmed, I watched my husband refill my water cup. He looked tired, but composed. Not shaken, not undone. He turned to me and said, "Everything's going to be okay, Sarah. We'll rebuild. We'll start fresh." Fresh. Another word that didn't feel like it belonged. I smiled, small and polite. My body was sore, my throat still raw from the smoke, but I nodded. I watched him leave for the night, coat over his arm, phone already back in his hand before the door shut. I looked up at the ceiling tiles above my bed and tried to find a pattern. When something moves that fast, it leaves you behind. Your mind, your body. They need time to catch up. I thought I was just tired, just in shock. But it wasn't only my body that had survived the fire. It was holding on to something my conscious mind couldn't touch yet. Not fully. Not until later that night when I couldn't sleep. Hospitals don't get dark. They just shift into a dimmed version of the day. Machines beep, carts roll by, voices murmur behind thick curtains. But somewhere between midnight and morning, a fragment of memory came back. It wasn't a flash. It wasn't cinematic. It was my hand, pressed flat against a wooden door. I felt the texture before I could see it. the grain of the paint, the coolness of the knob. Then the sound, scraping, not from fire, but from my own palm trying to twist the handle that didn't move. The light had been out. I remember that now. I'd come up the stairs in the dark, holding my belly with one hand, the railing with the other. Smoke was already coming in from the vents above, but I didn't panic, not yet. I reached the door, turned the knob. It didn't budge. At first, I thought maybe the door had swollen from humidity. Our basement had always been damp, especially in summer. But no, it didn't stick. It held. I turned it again. Harder. Nothing. That's when my pulse started to pick up. Not racing, not yet. Just speeding up enough to notice. I remember knocking, calm at first, then louder. I called out, no answer. And I remember the moment my body knew, even if my brain didn't say it out loud, someone had locked the door, from the other side. Everything after that came in fragments. The heat growing heavier in the air, my breath feeling thinner, faster, the metallic taste of panic starting to rise. I sat down on the top step, dizzy, trying to conserve oxygen. The rest is a blur. The fire department, strong arms lifting me out. Oxygen masks, flashing lights. They said it was a miracle I survived. But I survived because something failed. Because the door didn't hold long enough. Or someone hadn't planned for the smoke to reach me that fast. I wasn't saved. I escaped. Barely. Back in my hospital room, the next morning, there was a knock at the door. Not a nurse. A man in a blazer holding a clipboard, followed by a woman with a tablet. My husband stood behind them, arms crossed. "Just some quick paperwork," the man said, "to get everything moving for housing, coverage, recovery, standard stuff." They spoke like airline attendants during turbulence. Calm, practiced, just a little bump in the air. I skimmed the first few pages. Terms I recognized. Waiver, settlement, release of claim. My eyes landed on a line near the bottom of one page. This agreement resolves all disputes related to the incident occurring on date, waiving any future legal action by the undersigned. I looked up. "It's just boilerplate," my husband said quickly. "We've been through hell. Let's just sign and move on. For the baby." For the baby. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't even pressure in the usual sense. But it was clear. The message wasn't, "You must stay silent." It was, "Wouldn't it be better for everyone if you just let this go?" I glanced back at the woman with the tablet. She offered a warm, sympathetic smile. A lot of people find closure in just turning the page. Closure. A word I used to believe in. I didn't sign, not that day, but I didn't object either. I told them I'd take a look once I was feeling stronger, and they nodded like that was reasonable, like they hadn't tried to make a fire disappear under ink. That night, alone again in the dim hospital glow, I thought about the door, how quiet it had been, how heavy, how final, and I thought about how easy it is to suggest silence. That was the first time I understood how silence could be suggested, not demanded. And once it was suggested, it crept into everything. Conversations, paperwork, even the air between footsteps. I carried it with me when I left the hospital, folded in between my discharge forms and a clean set of maternity sweatpants someone had picked up from a Target run. The temporary apartment wasn't much, just 2 rooms above a florist's shop, with furniture that still smelled faintly of plastic wrap and floorboards that creaked no matter how gently I moved. It wasn't home, but I told myself it was enough for now. I spent most days in one of 2 places, the couch or the bathroom. At 7 months pregnant, everything hurt. I couldn't sit too long, couldn't lie down too flat, and walking more than a block left me winded. I counted the days not by dates, but by appointments. Ultrasounds, glucose checks, stress tests. Every nurse who touched my belly said the same thing. "She's strong, she's a fighter." I wondered sometimes if they were talking about the baby or me. The phone barely buzzed anymore. People stopped checking in after the second week. At first, there were flowers, casseroles, long messages filled with, "I'm so sorry," and "let me know if you need anything." But time passed, and people moved on. Grief has a half-life. So does sympathy. I started avoiding mirrors, not because I couldn't look at myself, but because I couldn't tell what I was supposed to see. A woman recovering, a mother-to-be, a widow, or none of the above. It was a neighbor, not my husband, who first mentioned her name. "I ran into Ethan the other day," she said, standing just outside the building, arms crossed against the autumn wind. "He looks better, actually. Said he's been getting a lot of support from, what's her name? The one from his office?" She tilted her head, waiting for me to confirm something I didn't know. "Caroline," I said flatly, before I could stop myself. I don't know how the name came to me. Maybe I'd heard it in passing, maybe I made it up, but her expression lit up like I'd handed her a piece of gossip tied with a bow. "Yes, Caroline. He said she's really helped him heal. It's nice he has someone during all this." Helped him heal. It echoed in my head longer than I expected. Over the next few days, it showed up again, in a voicemail from his sister. "He's lucky to have people like Caroline. She's been amazing." In a text from someone I hadn't spoken to since high school. "I saw Ethan in town with that woman. Guess we all grieve differently." It wasn't that he'd moved on. It was how everyone spoke like I'd already gone. As if I had died that night in the fire, and someone else had stepped into my place before the ashes cooled. One morning, lying on the couch with my legs swollen and propped up on pillows, I opened my phone without thinking and ended up on Instagram. I didn't search for him, just scrolled through a mutual friend's feed. But there, he was, in Rome, smiling in front of the Trevi Fountain, holding hands with a blonde I'd never met but somehow already recognized. The caption said, "New beginnings, letting go, moving forward." There were hashtags too. Chark healing journey, Knox Europe escape, Jatcher fresh start. In one photo, he was sipping espresso in a sunlit cafe, his hand resting lightly on hers across the table. In another, they stood in front of a real estate agency's glass window, smiling at listings in French. I stared at the screen until it blurred. Then I turned it over and let it fall to the floor. The heater in the apartment clicked on. The hum was steady, soft, just enough to fill the silence. It took a long time before I could breathe evenly again. Not cry, just breathe. That night, I washed a few baby onesies by hand in the sink and hung them on the shower rod to dry. The fabric was pale pink and soft. I stared at them, dripping and empty, and whispered aloud, "If this was an accident, why does it look like a plan?" The words hung there, heavier than steam. I didn't answer myself. I wasn't ready to. But for the first time, I didn't flinch at the question. That was the moment I almost convinced myself to let it all go. I could have packed a small suitcase, cashed out what little I had left in my name, and vanished into a life no one was watching. Somewhere quieter, somewhere no one knew my face or my husband's name or the fire that tore through our house while I was locked beneath it. But I didn't. I stayed. Part of me says it was because of the baby. Part of me says it was because I was too tired to run. The truth is, probably both. But there's a smaller voice, the one I wasn't supposed to listen to, that said something else entirely. Stay. Watch. Remember everything. The weeks after the fire felt like a long hallway with no doors. The apartment they moved me into had the same beige walls as a motel, just dressed up with a few bland paintings and a bowl of fake lemons on the counter. It wasn't home, but it wasn't a hospital either. That was apparently the best anyone could do. Most days passed in a blur of doctor visits, insurance paperwork I barely touched, and long hours staring out the window with my hands resting on my stomach, counting soft kicks. The baby was still with me. She was the only part of that life I got to keep. People stopped calling. At first, I thought it was just fatigue. Maybe everyone assumed I needed rest. But then the quiet stretched, and the silence around me didn't feel protective. It felt orchestrated. My phone lit up only for reminders or the occasional polite message from someone in his family. Thinking of you. Hope you're healing. Let us know if you need anything. They never meant it. One evening, after a prenatal appointment, I sat in the clinic's waiting room a little longer than usual. I watched the receptionist print out someone's paperwork. Her fingers moved so effortlessly across the keys, like she'd done it 1,000 times. Her voice was low, gentle, as she handed the documents over to the woman standing beside me. Then she turned to me, eyes kind but unreadable, and asked, "Are you still staying on Briar Hill?" I nodded. "Someone should fix that basement door. That thing doesn't lock itself." It was a sentence that shouldn't have meant anything. But it did. She didn't say it with suspicion. She didn't know what happened that night. She couldn't have. But it landed somewhere deeper than accusation. It was a simple statement of fact. A door like that, with a latch on the outside, doesn't just click shut on its own. On the drive back, I didn't turn the radio on. I sat in the car for nearly 20 minutes after parking, engine off, fingers tight around the steering wheel. I didn't cry, I didn't shake, I just stared out at nothing, letting the silence settle in places that had been too loud for too long. That was the moment things shifted. I didn't tell anyone about that conversation. I didn't write it down. I didn't even repeat the words aloud, not to myself, not to the mirror, not to the doctor during my next check-in. But from that moment forward, I stopped talking, not completely. I still said good morning to the neighbor. I still confirmed appointments, but I stopped explaining myself. I stopped offering context to people who didn't ask for it in good faith. I let rumors stand where they were planted. He said I was confused. I let him. He told people I'd suffered memory loss. I didn't correct them. He painted me as fragile, hormonal, overwrought. I let them believe that too. Because silence, real silence, the kind that isn't born from fear but from calculation, gives you something else entirely. It gives you clarity. And clarity, I was learning, was the most dangerous thing I could possess. In the absence of noise, I noticed things. The way my name stopped appearing in email threads. The way legal representatives began addressing him directly instead of both of us. The way his mother sent a gift for the baby, but forgot to include a card addressed to me. I wasn't just grieving a marriage. I was being erased from it. He'd moved on before the ashes were cold. And somehow, the story was taking shape in his favor. They said I had been through so much. They said he'd been so strong through it all. They said she'd helped him find peace again. I stayed quiet, but I watched. It became clear that I was no longer part of their plans. Invitations stopped arriving. Group messages no longer included my number. Photos of gatherings popped up online, family barbecues, baby showers hosted on his side of the family, and I saw the space where I used to stand now filled with someone else's smile. I was a ghost in their world, conveniently absent, silenced but still breathing. And in that silence, something in me began to harden. The kind of rage that doesn't scream. It doesn't flail. It doesn't demand attention. It waits. It watches. And it learns. They thought I was gone. They thought they'd buried me under layers of pity and politeness and a very convenient version of the truth. But they made one mistake. They underestimated a woman who'd already lost everything. That was the moment I knew I was no longer waiting to be saved. I was preparing. They thought I was done. I was just finished talking. Silence had served its purpose. Now it was time for something else, something colder, slower, and sharper. The baby was born 2 weeks early. The nurses called it a blessing. "Stress does that," one of them whispered, helping me breathe through the last stretch, her palm steady on my shoulder. "You're safe now. That's what matters." Safe was a relative word. Breathing didn't feel the same as living, not yet. After the discharge papers were signed, I didn't go home. I went to the furnished apartment the hospital social worker helped me find. A place with a short-term lease, a sink that dripped, and a neighbor who always left her television volume one notch too high. But it was mine. No cameras, no deadlocks, no one finishing my sentences. In those early postpartum days, people expected collapse, emotion, rage, maybe even revenge. But I did none of that. I moved with the quiet precision of someone who no longer needed to explain herself. There wasn't any energy left for fury. I was exhausted in a different way, a bone-deep steadiness that made every decision feel deliberate. I started with the attorney. The office was beige and unimpressive, which I appreciated. The receptionist didn't ask why I was there. The lawyer, Eileen Parker, didn't blink when I slid a worn folder across the table. "I don't want revenge," I said, settling into the chair across from her. "I want documentation, paper trails, a timeline." Eileen opened the folder. Inside were copies of the insurance policy, hospital reports, printed screenshots, timestamps. She didn't interrupt me as I spoke, and when I finished, she simply nodded and said, "You came prepared." It wasn't courage. It was necessity. You stop waiting for people to do the right thing once you realize they're capable of doing the worst. Over the next few weeks, I sat in on meetings. Not many, just enough to be visible. Legal mediation, casual follow-ups with his representation. The kind of bureaucratic dance that assumes civility where history used to be. Every time I entered a room, I could see the faint surprise in their faces. I wasn't crying. I wasn't shaking. I didn't even speak unless asked. They thought I was there to settle. I let them believe that. "He's made progress," one of them said in a neutral tone, like they were describing a child's grades. "He's looking to rebuild, move forward, and you, of course, will be supported." I nodded as they spoke. I wrote things down. I underlined sentences. No one asked what I remembered about the fire. No one brought up the basement. But I noticed something else, how confidently stories were repeated, how versions of events were rehearsed like lines in a school play. He was cooperative. He was traumatized too. He had nothing to gain from hurting me. It was all just unfortunate. Back inside the system, I was suddenly invisible. Again, but not powerless. What they didn't realize was that I wasn't listening to their words. I was studying their patterns. There was one moment that changed everything. It wasn't dramatic, just a short exchange in a side hallway with a junior clerk who didn't know the whole story. I was holding my baby, waiting for a meeting to start, when she glanced at the file in my hand and said, almost casually, "Oh, this is the case with the fire. The one where the basement door locked itself." I didn't say anything. I just looked at her. She blinked. "Sorry, they said it probably jammed. That's the phrasing I saw." That phrasing stayed with me all the way home. I sat in the parked car long after the baby fell asleep in her carrier. "That door doesn't lock itself." The sentence landed harder than any accusation. It was just logic, quiet, undeniable logic. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stopped talking. I stopped correcting people when they got the story wrong. I stopped reminding the world that I had lived through something no one else had the decency to name. I answered only what was asked. I let their assumptions fill the space. But I was paying attention. They didn't realize how much gets recorded. Not in some shady, illegal way, but automatically. Phone calls logged, emails timestamped, alarm systems, delivery notifications, GPS data, confirmations. It was all there, humming quietly behind the surface of their version of events. I didn't need to corner anyone. They had already done the documenting for me. One afternoon, I sat in Eileen's office again, going over a line in the insurance policy. She didn't look up from the page as she said, "Do you want to go public?" I shook my head. "Not yet." "Why not?" "Because he hasn't made his last mistake." She leaned back, arms folded. "You think he will?" "I know he will. He doesn't know I stopped playing his game. That's when people get sloppy." Days turned into weeks, but I didn't waver. I fed the baby. I took long walks. I answered no calls I didn't recognize. When the invitations stopped, I wasn't surprised. When I saw family group texts where I'd once been included, now making plans I wasn't part of, I didn't flinch. To them, I was erased, quiet, compliant, conveniently forgettable. And that's exactly what I needed to be. Because when someone stops seeing you as a threat, they also stop watching what they say. He had already slipped once, talking to a friend on speakerphone while waiting for me to sign the final papers. He didn't know I'd walked in early. He didn't notice me in the hallway. "She's just dragging it out," he laughed. "She'll cave soon. She always does." I didn't cave. I left the apartment quietly, got into the car, and made a note in my phone. Date, time, context. I wasn't collecting rage anymore. I was collecting proof. I just needed him to keep talking. That was the thought I carried with me into the mediation room, the same way I carried my keys, my phone, and the folded list of questions I didn't plan to ask. The room itself was forgettable on purpose. Beige walls, a long table with water glasses set at equal distances, the low hum of air conditioning that made silence feel official. Nothing about it suggested consequences. He looked comfortable, not relaxed exactly, but settled, like someone sitting through a meeting he believed he'd already won. He nodded politely at the mediator, glanced at his watch, then at me. There was no apology in his eyes. No fear either, just impatience. "This shouldn't take long," he said, with a thin smile. "We've already been through most of this." I said nothing. I placed my hands in my lap and waited. When he began recounting the night of the fire, his voice was smooth, practiced. I'd heard this version before, how he smelled smoke, how everything happened so fast, how panic makes people misremember details. He spoke in complete sentences, careful to sound cooperative, almost generous with information. "It was chaos," he said. "I did everything I could. Anyone would have." The mediator nodded, jotting something down. A recorder sat in the center of the table, its red light steady and unremarkable. He continued, filling the space with confidence. He explained where he was standing, what he thought I was doing, how he assumed I'd already made it out. He talked about firefighters, neighbors, the confusion afterward. It was all very reasonable. Then, without being asked, he added one more sentence. "I mean, honestly," he said, leaning back slightly, "I didn't think she'd make it." The words landed quietly. No raised voice, no drama. Just a statement, offered casually, like a fact that had been waiting its turn. For a moment, nothing happened. The mediator didn't look up right away. The attorney across from him froze, with her pen hovering over the page. I felt my heartbeat slow instead of speed up, like my body had been preparing for this exact moment. I didn't react. I didn't change my expression. I let the room catch up. A few seconds passed. Then the mediator cleared his throat. "I'm sorry," he said carefully. "Can you clarify what you meant by that?" He frowned, just slightly. "I just mean, the situation was bad. Fires are unpredictable." I tilted my head, not in accusation, but curiosity. "Can I ask something?" I said, my voice even. "At what point did you think I wouldn't survive?" He opened his mouth, closed it, tried again. "Well, I assumed, based on the timing, that—" "The timing of what?" I asked. Silence stretched. The recorder hummed softly, doing its job. He glanced toward his attorney, then back at the table. "It was an accident," he said, too quickly. "I didn't mean—" But the sentence had already done its damage. It didn't match the reports. It didn't align with the timelines he'd sworn to before. It didn't fit the version where he believed I was already safe. No one raised their voice. No one needed to. The mediator asked another question, then another, each one smaller than the last, each one tightening the frame around that single, unnecessary sentence. The story he'd rehearsed began to sag under its own weight. I sat back and listened. For the first time since the fire, people weren't asking me how I felt. They were asking him what he knew, and when he knew it. I watched the shift happen, not emotionally, but structurally, like a building quietly changing its load-bearing points. I felt no rush of triumph, no release of anger, just a steady exhale. When the session ended, no one rushed to stand. Papers were gathered slowly. The mediator avoided eye contact. His attorney leaned in close and whispered something urgent, her voice low. I picked up my bag and rose calmly. In the hallway, as I walked past the muted artwork and closed office doors, I realized something important. The truth hadn't needed me to fight for it. It had been waiting patiently, documented, recorded, spoken aloud at exactly the wrong time. I stepped outside into the afternoon light, the air warmer than I expected. My phone buzzed with a message from Eileen. "We have enough," it read. I closed my eyes for a moment, not in relief, but recognition. When the truth finally spoke, it didn't need my voice. I stepped out of the courthouse not with a sense of victory, but with air in my lungs I hadn't realized I'd been holding for months. There was no applause, no reporters, no grand speeches or slamming gavels. Just the metallic click of the door behind me and the soft weight of a file folder under my arm. Copies of decisions, closure typed in 12-point font. I didn't look back. Justice didn't feel like fireworks. It felt like clarity. The verdict had come down clean and quiet, like winter rain. He wasn't handcuffed. There was no outburst. But the judgment was final. The evidence spoke louder than any accusation I could have hurled. It said enough that even his own lawyer looked away while it was read aloud. I walked down the courthouse steps with my shoulders lighter than I remembered them ever being. Eileen was waiting by the car, engine running, hands tucked into her coat pockets. She didn't say anything, just nodded, opened the passenger door, and let me slide in. We didn't need words. We'd used them all up in rooms that smelled like paperwork and printer ink. The car ride home was quiet, and for once, it wasn't the silence of pain. It was the silence of things finally settling. At the house, I let the folder sit on the kitchen counter. I didn't rush to tell anyone. I didn't post. I didn't call. I just boiled water, made tea, and looked out the window as if the sky might look different now. It didn't. But I did. The next morning, I checked the mailbox. Inside was a single envelope from the county clerk's office, thick with official pages. It was time. Later that week, I sat in a government office beneath fluorescent lights, holding my newborn daughter on one side and a pen in the other. I filled out the paperwork slowly, reading every word, every line, every signature field. When they called my name to submit the forms, I walked up with steady steps and slid them across the counter. "Back to your maiden name?" the clerk asked. I nodded. She stamped it with a soft thud. "It's done." Just like that. I signed my name again, but this time it wasn't out of obligation. It wasn't to join someone else's path or fit into their story. It was mine now, every letter mine. I didn't cry. I walked out with my daughter bundled against my chest and the paperwork folded in my bag. We passed people on the sidewalk, some rushing, some wandering, and none of them knew that today was the day I got to become myself again. I didn't need them to. The people I once called family hadn't reached out, not when the verdict came, not when my name changed, not even when the fire nearly took everything. No letters, no messages, not even a poorly timed thinking of you. And strangely, I was okay with it. I stopped waiting for them to say something that could undo what they had chosen to ignore. Their silence said enough. It said they'd chosen sides the moment they doubted me. And now, months later, they were sticking to it. Not out of principle, but because silence is easier than accountability. I didn't hate them. I just no longer needed them. I spent more time outside now. Not far, just the park 2 blocks from our place. I'd sit on a bench beneath the wide maple tree, my daughter asleep in her stroller, and watch kids play or older couples walk slowly hand in hand. No one knew my story there. I was just another woman in sweatpants with tired eyes and a diaper bag. I liked it that way. Freedom didn't feel like fireworks. It felt like breathing without explanation. I passed the old house once, not on purpose. I'd taken a different route home, trying to avoid traffic, and there it was, boarded windows, a crooked mailbox, grass grown wild along the edges. A for sale sign leaned half-heartedly in the yard, sun-bleached and ignored. I didn't stop. I didn't need to. That place had already stopped being mine the day he turned a lock and walked away. As I pulled into our driveway that evening, I unbuckled my daughter from her car seat and held her close. She stirred a little, then settled her cheek against my shoulder. Inside, the living room was warm, not from a fireplace, but from something else entirely. Routine. Peace. The hum of the fridge, the quiet shuffle of laundry in the washer. The safety of knowing no one would twist that peace against me again. I kissed her forehead and whispered, "We're home." I didn't survive to be believed. I survived to live. I don't go back downstairs. Not in houses, not in life.